So, let's get right into it. Let's talk about the show, because that's sort of the main thing that we're going to be talking about, you know? It's the show. Well, I'm really grateful for the opportunity, honestly. This was my dream, this was my passion, to hop on the radio and just talk about the things that I am passionate about. You know what I mean? So I'm very happy to do this. We'll talk about the general structure of the show. Of course, tagline, albums and how they affect us, right? I usually pick albums that I'm passionate about, which means, honestly, they're going to be positive talks. Just be blunt with you. Because if I have something to say, it means I'm not going to really be super negative about a lot of stuff, because I'm generally pretty positive. I'm a positive guy. But I'm always willing to critique, and I will be critiquing everything I discuss. And we're going to put some negative ones out there just for a little bit of difference, you know? So we got a few minutes of preamble talk, may or may not be related to the album at hand. Mostly just to fill out the 30-minute worth of stuff. And generally it's going to be freeform, but I did write an outline. And we're going to play a deep cut or favorite song at the end of the block, which I hopefully will get right. I have the vinyl of White Pony here, actually, and it's going to be great. And remember, my opinion. This is all my opinion. We're talking positive. We might talk a little negative. So it's my opinion. Opinions, we all got them. So don't be mad. And if you want to disagree or critique me or listen in, check out Basstunes KUCI on Instagram. Now, I forgot to do this. Our current meter reading, you're listening to KUCI 88.9 FM, and we're currently at 200.3 watts, which is a lot, isn't it? So let's just get into the album, because I'm not sure how much time we got. Let's turn this down a little bit. Kind of a loud thing. So, White Pony. What led up to the album's release? Well, Deftones, that's the album artist we're talking about. New metal, alternative metal, sort of the genre they go by nowadays, and they're based out of Sacramento, California. They formed in the late 80s, but they only put out their first debut album, Adrenaline, in 1995. And it was a lot closer to what people would consider new metal, which is like this sort of rap, rock, metal infusion. And you want some artists like that, you know, we got the Limp Bizkits, the Korns, the Linkin Parks, the big people. And that's where a lot of metal was kind of at in the 90s. And it was totally, I would definitely say that Adrenaline veered a lot closer to that sort of stuff compared to, let's say, its contemporaries. But not as much so, right? It was its own little thing, but something like 7 Words, he rapped on it, right? And of course, it was more explicit than I think their later projects in terms of, you know, swearing, even though this album does have swearing. That's why I'm playing the instrumentals, because they're swearing on the first track, Beta Sarah, the one that I wanted to play over. And, well, I couldn't because he's cursing on it. Can't have that on the station, can we? But it was definitely more nuanced, and it garnered some more reception. 2 years later, Around the Fur came out, and that's what really sort of propelled them much more than Adrenaline. And 2 of their biggest songs are from that album, being My Own Summer, Shove It, and Be Quiet and Drive Far Away. Generally, it departed from the traditional nu metal style, but actually in interviews, the guitarist Stephen Gardner, he denied they made an intentional decision. Featured some new wave and post-punk influence and sort of solidified their position as an alternative metal band. Something different, something fully their own, and they're coming into their own style, you know what I mean? So that's all great, right? Of course, the song that I heard first from them was Be Quiet and Drive. So, honestly, that's their big thing, you know? That's their big kicker. So we're all set there. So what about the creation of White Pony? Well, it took place from August to December in 1999. Most of the time was actually just being spent writing the songs. Changing the House of Flies apparently took the most time. It took months just to write the song, lyrically and I assume compositionally too. And it was the longest amount of time the band actually spent on a project so far. It's really interesting. Although, a lot of the time, apparently, they were playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater on the PlayStation in the studio. Ate up so much time, but a lot of their recording time was sort of spent on extracurricular type things, which I think is not a bad thing. I think it helps the band's morale, you know? And the label sort of pressured the band to release sooner than 2000, but they felt that they could take their time, make the album they want. And it actually featured Frank Delgado's first appearance as a full-time band member. And Chino Moreno, the vocalist of the band, the guy who makes all the, you know, the speaking stuff, he actually played the guitar this time, not just vocals. He was on the rhythm guitar, which is quite cool. But that's the concept of the album. What about the album itself? I quite like this album. Compared to Around the Fur, and especially compared to Adrenaline, it's a lot more varied in terms of dynamics, tone, and sort of choice of instruments and composition. You have sort of a softer sound in a lot of the time, something a little bit more detailed and varied. Synths play a larger role, and also sampling guitars to act like synthesizers. It sort of makes it more layered, more, different. And, of course, in classic Deftones fashion, they got the soft, loud dynamics. But not every track is like that. Like the next track in the instrumentals, Elite. That one is probably the heaviest metal song on the whole thing, and it's actually the song of the album that won a freaking Grammy. It won a Grammy. And I wanted to talk about it. Obviously not super little popular for the station, but hey, we're talking about it. We're not playing it, although we will play a deep cut at the end. Maybe not deep cut. I'm playing Digital Bath at the end. I just love that song, and I wanted to put it on the vinyl. But yeah, Elite's a really hard example. It's going to come up real shortly right now. You hear that, don't you? That is loud. That is loud, isn't it? That is quite loud. That is quite the loud thing. And it just keeps going. There isn't really a point of pause or progression. That soft, loud dynamic where he starts slow and creeping in a very sensual manner, which is one of the words I would describe the discography as. This is just straight metal all the way through, I love that little gap. That's my favorite part of the entire song. Is how it just sort of gaps out like that, It's great. But I guess a soft example, which will come up later, maybe, depending on the time I'm talking, is Teenager. This is a really interesting one because I feel like Elite and Teenager are sort of like the two extreme case scenarios to sort of look at the sound of this band and how it really varies on this project. Teenager's really soft, and in fact, it doesn't even have any real band work. It samples a guitar compressed to a lot, and there's a drum machine as the drum, which is something crazy. Drum machine for, Pete's sake. Gotta watch my mouth here. That's kind of the biggest caveat of the show, It's a little on the spot here. And it's a totally different sound, much more soft and kind of eerie with these like creeping eerie synthesizers in the background. A very intimate song. Vocalist Moreno actually wrote it when he was 15 after his first relationship, so kind of a pretty teenager-centric song, as is the name. And it also claims to fame as the longest song in their discography, although I might need to recheck that, which is the last song, Pink Maggot. It clocks in at 7 minutes and 33 seconds. And it kind of is the really slow track. It's sort of part of the back half of the album, but I don't really like the back half compared to the front. I like it now, but it's one of those ones where I think the front half is amazing. From track 1 to 4, and then change. But there's also some great tracks in between those ones. But, I think the front half is a bit stronger than the back half, at least for my tastes. I think it veers in a more traditional metal perspective that I'm more of a fan of. I love this song. I was actually, I was on the freeway to this song on the way to the station. Well, on the way to the station, I'm on the way to my house. I drove here from the station to my house. That's a crazy song. Don't play Deftones while you're driving. Here's a PSA for y'all. Don't play them while you're driving. Because you might get pulled over. You might hurt somebody. And you don't want that, do you? You don't want a ticket. You don't want to potentially harm somebody. Stay safe on the road. But Pink Maggot itself is weird because it starts so slow, as I said. It's got this really just ambient intro with just these like creeping guitars. And it just sort of builds very slowly until this massive explosion where the real hook of the song comes. And it just pummels you. Sorry for the volume there. I'm still getting used to the whole volume thing. But it pummels you, It just smacks you right in the gut, which is what I love about this band. This really full and just all-encompassing sound. And that's why I feel like this band sometimes gets compared to the genre of shoegaze for, I think, sort of a good reason, because they both have this very noisy, just sort of filling sound that sort of encapsulates you. Although, of course, this music is a lot faster in tempo, harder in material, and less, I guess, audibly pleasing, although it's definitely more traditional. And I would say this album is quite audibly pleasing. I think his album is mixed very well. It's kind of treble heavy, but it's very clear and crisp. And there's a good variety of, treble, mids, and bass. Especially on a good stereo system. It's very it's very filling in a good way. You know what I mean? Yeah. So generally, it's just a much more unique album compared to Around the Fur in terms of ideas, progression, and the songs on these just run a lot longer than previous efforts. And there's and of course, Pink Maggot, but also Passenger and Change, which was the main single from this album, and is actually, according to streaming, their biggest song to date, which is cool. These are these long, sprawling epics, which they sort of alternate, I think, in their discography between these sort of punchier, louder epics, these louder tracks, and then these just long, sprawling epics that just sort of build and fill the room with sound. And I don't think we're going to get to that in the instrumental playlist anytime soon, because that's, as I said, more of a back-heavy thing on the back end of the album. But yeah, I mean, also, what differs from this album compared to, let's say, Around the Fur or Adrenaline is lyrically. The lyrics on this project are quite fantastical and very hyperbolic in nature. Maybe I didn't say that word right, but it doesn't matter. We're doing it the way I do it. It's just... Well, we can ask Chino Moreno, which is lead vocalist, as I said. He said that one of the main things he did differently on this album, as a vocalist, was to basically just write about stuff other than himself. And you had tracks like Mascara on Around the Fur, which is actually kind of my favorite track on that album, because it sort of talks about a failed marriage he had. And a lot of these tracks, though sort of abstract in nature, were more personally related to him compared to the sort of fantastical scenarios. Like the first track, Fade to Sarah, is like a song about being in the perspective of someone being kidnapped in a police chase, and then being threatened by weapons and stuff. It's crazy. And I think Digital Bath, it's sort of the biggest thing that sort of shows the contrast between their potentially softer and more, I guess, sensual sounds and their more very just violent and sort of crazy lyrics. I mean, you might not know it. If you listen to Digital Bath, the entirety of it is this fantastical scenario Moreno came up with about electrocuting a girl in a bathtub? It's crazy. And he says it in the song, but you're not really paying attention to it. And that's one of the things I really like about it, is that you don't really pay attention to that sort of dark stuff. You sort of just pay attention to the sound of it, and then you realize, oh wow, this is messed up. And I think that's kind of cool. I don't advocate for any of that stuff, but it's kind of crazy. It accentuates the aggressive backgrounds, but sometimes contrasts it. And I feel like a lot of the lyrics are sort of possessive in nature. That's sort of the biggest thing I would say. Very intimate in nature. A lot of it is regarding relationships with people. Streetcar, here's my new address. Changing the house applies, all about change. I watched a change in you. It's like you never had wings. Which that song in particular, the closest thing I could hear from what I read is Moreno essentially sort of wrote it as a sort of a look back at himself, for him treating, I guess, someone who was a girl who I guess was into him in a very negative way. The lyrics, I watched it change in you, I pulled off your ring. Sort of this possessive control of a person, their thoughts, and then realizing they're gone, they changed, they can't deal with you anymore. And you feel bad. I gave you the gun, blew you away. And of course, Teenagers hook, now I'm through with the new you. That's about all the notes I had written. I wrote a lot of notes for this, and that's generally how I'm going to do it. I write an outline. But yeah, I guess if we talk about White Pony, I freaking love this album, and I guess I can talk about the rest of their discography too, because generally with this show, I usually would pick one example of an artist that I like the most or I have the most to say about, and sort of use that as a way to talk about the rest of their discography, you know what I mean? So, as I said, Adrenaline, I love Bored. That one, That one is nice and hard hitting. You know what I mean? Bored is just this very grungy metal, much more, I'd say, a bright sound, less varied compared to stuff on here. And the same would go for Around the Fur, although I do think their dynamics are much cleaner and much more varied. The one thing I love is the snare on most of their songs. Although it seems that they sort of changed around a lot of the snares, I read that somewhere, for Around the Fur, but they kept the same snare, the drummer, for White Pony, you know? Someone just waved at me. Hello, who that was. I'll talk to you later, you know? Oh, that's a little bit of a, that gave me a weird feeling. Around the Fur, I mean, it has one of my favorite songs. I can't really pick a favorite song from their discography, but yeah, definitely one of them is Be Quiet and Drive. It's one of those, not really a sprawling epic, but just one that just keeps on going and going, and it has a good rhythm. It's fast-paced. I like the lyrics of it about just wanting to start over somewhere. Drive me far away. And there's some, you know, the usual Chino Moreno possessive, weirdly lyrics like that, like, you know, it feels good to know you're on mine, so drive me far away. It's just wanting to get away. Obviously driving, and that's a great song to drive on the freeway to, but don't drive on the freeway unless you can handle it. And honestly, me personally, I do have my license. I've driven for, I'd say about 8 months now, June 2021. The most risky moments I've had was when they came on, all right? Listen, I'm not sure if they're listening, but the boys at the band Higher, which I'm not going to talk about ever if we ever make a project, playing for my friend's band, you know, monetary, plugola, FCC regulations. But they can recall the time Deftones came on and they wanted to go to KFC. I took a pretty hard swerve and went over the curb in the Model Y. And they still remember that moment. And all I could say afterwards was, I'm sorry, the Deftones. They kicked in, I swerved. Another thing. Another disclaimer, if you're a parent, don't let your kid drive a car that has the acceleration like the freaking Model Y if you want them to be safe. I consider myself a relatively good driver, but that thing goes fast, all right? Give him a little bit of a beater that's safe, all right? I'm thankful to have the opportunity to drive that car. It's not mine, it's my mother's, but, you know. But it's not really something I'd recommend. It's absurd. Yeah, Around the Fur, great project. What about their other ones? The other ones I haven't really checked out as much. After White Pony's release in 2000, they took a 3-year break and released a self-titled album in 2003, and that one was sort of trying to get back to the roots of their more classic heavy metal atmosphere, and I haven't heard anything from there aside from Minerva, so I can't comment on that. Next release, 2006, is Saturday Night Wrist, which I love the album cover of. It's definitely a more ambient, more synth-heavy, dreamy feel, which I like. And I actually talked about the next album that I think it inspired, which is Koi no Yokon, which wasn't their next release. It was the release after Diamond Eyes in 2010, which was sort of delayed because of former bassist Chi Chang's car accident into a coma, which he sadly passed away from. But there were sort of the inklings of this more, less heavy and more, I don't know, dreamy sound to Saturday Night Wrist. Although it's one of the more explicit albums, don't listen to Pink Cell Phone if you just don't listen to the ending of it. I'm not a prude, okay? But it's just gross. And I think every person who's reviewed this album has said the exact same thing about Pink Cell Phone. It is gross. Very scatological in nature, and it's not pleasing. Diamond Eyes, another return to form. There's some big classics from there. What people have said is their saddest song, Sex Tape, which I'm not sure about, right? But I don't know if I should have said that. My apologies if so. But there's some good stuff on there. I need to check that out. And the other one that I really like is definitely Koi no Yokon. And that's the one that I really like. That's the one that I talked about for my demo for this program, which I wasn't going to play because I wanted to do this live. We'll see how being live went. Maybe for interviews I'll do it pre-recorded, but generally I want to do this show live. But I feel like that album is where they really realized a lot of just the beauty in that sort of dreamy sound. And they had a good mix between these like hard-hitting, fast anthems, very self-empowering on songs like Leathers, and like stuff like Entombed and Tempest and Rosemary, which are these long, sprawling, filling epics, which are beautiful. And there's a lot of beauty in their sound, but not to the extent of that. And then afterwards, Gork came out in 2016. I've heard a lot of bad things about it. And then Ohms in 2020, which I haven't checked out. The Ohms tour in 2020, of course, was sold out, right? It was shut down because of the pandemic. And now in 2022, they're actually doing it. But unfortunately, well, all the tickets are basically like $500. I looked on Ticketmaster, so I wasn't able to go to that because I only really became a big Deftones fan in late 2021 after that. But yeah, judging by the time, I'm going to check something real quick before we really get into this, right? Because I do want to close this out with a song from White Pony, right? I want to close it out with Digital Bath. I have a couple more minutes. All right. I thought Digital Bath was about 6 minutes. So there's some closing things. You are listening to Bass Tunes on KUCI 88.9 FM in Irvine. All right? And the current, well, I don't need to read the wattage. But thank you all so much for listening to this show, all right? There were some hiccups along the way because I wasn't able to get the USB working on my MacBook, and that's how I wanted to play the audio instead of having to use the Carts computer. But it's okay. We got it. We got something through, and I'm just so happy, and I feel so lucky to be part of this. If you have anything to say to me, if you want to keep in touch with the next episode, because I already have episodes 2 and 3 planned, all right? I'm going to put out a promo for it soon on BASEDTUNES KUCI on Instagram. My Instagram there is too, my personal one. So if you want to follow me, show me some love, I would really appreciate it. And yeah. So without further ado, I'm going to play y'all out with Digital Bath, the second song off White Pony, on the record player. So there might be some problems with that, but we're going to see how it goes. All right? So thank you all so much for listening to Bass Tunes. KUCI 88.9 FM Irvine.
To say breathed, then you stopped. I breathed and dried you off.
The opinions and views expressed in this program do not reflect those of KUCI, its management, or the UC Board of Regents.